All eyes will also be on Florida tonight. It is one of 6 battleground states expected to decide the election. President Trump and Joe Biden are trying to win the Sunshine State's 29 electoral votes. Both candidates have spent considerable time there trying their hardest to swing the vote their way, but Florida appears to be holding firm to its toss-up status, with the latest CBS battleground tracker poll showing the former vice president leading, but that is within the margin of error. Joining us now is CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez. He's outside a polling station in Miami. So, Manny, same question that I was just sort of suggesting to Caitlin. Nearly 64% of registered voters in Florida cast their ballots before Election Day. What kind of a turnout are we expecting today? What have you seen so far on the ground? Again, going back to the point that I was making earlier, that the Democrats say that their numbers, their strength comes from early voting and mail-in votes, and Republicans saying they expect their supporters to turn up on Election Day.
Well, what I can tell you is, at least at this polling location, a public library in North Miami, there is no line right now. People were able to get in pretty quickly. So, yes, it does go to show that there was such an interest in mailing their ballots in or early voting among people in both parties and even third parties that you may not see many lines today unless there are problems at some of the polling locations. It is still early, so we're, of course, looking out for all of those things that could happen on an election day. But at least here in North Miami, you can see behind me, anybody who wants to get in today, if this is your polling location, you're not going to have a problem getting in.
So polls still suggest a very, very, very tight race in the Sunshine State. The latest CBS tracker poll shows that Joe Biden is leading by 4 points over Trump. But in 2016, polls show that Hillary Clinton was ahead of Mr. Trump, but ended up winning the state by 1.2 percentage points, squeaking in there. Could we see a similar victory for President Trump like we saw in 2016?
Well, that's $1 million question, of course, and hopefully we'll have an answer to that tonight. What I can tell you is the ground game here, what it has been like for each campaign. And because it is always so tight here in Florida, the margins of victory, they've basically just been trying to eat away at each other's advantages. So for the Biden campaign, maybe trying to take away some of those senior voters that went for President Trump in 2016, who may not be willing to vote for him again in 2020. For President Trump, it has been turning out the Latino voters here in Miami-Dade County, many of whom are Cuban Americans or Venezuelan Americans, and have told us that they like his stance against socialism, and many feel that that label of socialist kind of stuck to Joe Biden, as you have heard and we've seen in many of the campaign ads here. But again, Florida is just so hard to tell. Just yesterday, we were speaking to Cuban American voters who were casting their ballots. We spoke to a young woman, first-time voter. She was voting for President Trump. A young man who is a Republican who said that this time he was voting for Joe Biden.
And we know, Manny, that ballot processing and counting began, as you say, more than 3 weeks ago. We actually showed some photos and video of people standing in line back in late October. The Associated Press called Florida for President Trump just before 11 p.m. on Election Day. By when? This was back in 2016. By when do you think we'll know who won this critical state? I mean, as you just said, they've been counting for quite some time, and we expect that we should probably know something by no later than 8 or 9, right, Manny?
Well, that would be the hope. You know, as you mentioned, there were lines. In fact, when we were standing just at this same polling location on October 19th, the first day of early in-person voting, people really wanted to get out early. What that means is that here in Florida, they've been able to process and count those ballots for more than 3 weeks. So the expectation is that by the time the polls close, and maybe an hour or two after that, you probably will have a good indication of which way the state of Florida is going in the 2020 election.
One of the things that I think is sort of been interesting is this notion that Republicans will turn out voters on the day of the election. Now, during the Bush v. Gore battle back in 2000, the court halted a recount of votes in Florida. We don't expect that to happen this time around because the polling number, it's so interesting to me that there's a lot of history that we've talked about in just this last hour, but so many things are different from 2000 to 2016, including the fact that, it's really hard to find undecided voters in Florida, Manny. Did you, through the whole course of your reporting, find anybody who was sort of still on the fence?
Not really. There have been very few people who are truly undecided in this election. So then it becomes about turnout. It becomes about which candidate can bring out the most supporters. And of course, he brought up the 2000 election, very close one here in Florida. There is a state law now that pretty much kicks in automatically if the winner gets it's half of 1 percentage point or less, then the Secretary of State will automatically order a recount in this state. And then there are other laws that govern that now that are a bit different than they were back then. So I think the sense is that the state is better equipped to handle these close elections. You'll recall that in 2018, there was a recount in the race for governor here and in a Senate race. So we've been here before, but overall, many election experts that we have spoken with throughout this process have said that because Florida has had such issues in the past and because Florida can begin counting and processing ballots early, they believe that we will have a good sense of how this state is going by tonight.
All right, well, we'll be watching. That state is incredibly important to both candidates. Manny, thank you very much.